Hello, I'm Matthew Jarron, Museum Curator at the University of Dundee, and welcome to the latest in a series of short films in which I talk about some of the highlights of the University Museum collections. And today I want to tell you a bit more about the development of the University art collections in the 1960s. In an earlier film a few weeks ago, I spoke about the major bequest of drawings and paintings that we received in the 1950s from a former student, James Nichol. And it was another past student, James Lamb, that helped to take the university into a new era of more active art collecting. James Charles Lamb was born in Dundee in 1894 and began studying at University College Dundee before the First World War. He was awarded a bursary in 1913 to specialise in engineering, just as the new engineering laboratories opened in the Harris Building. But the war interrupted his studies and he eventually graduated in 1919. He soon set up his own motor engineering firm, J.C. Lamb & Co., running the highly successful Lamb's Garage for many years, first in King Street and later in Trades Lane. In 1947, Lamb renewed his connection with University College, becoming a member of the College Council. Although he moved to Crieff in the 1950s, he continued his association with Dundee, and in 1960 he gave £1,000 to what was by then Queen's College Dundee to start a fine art purchasing fund. Of course, there was no museum curator at that time, so a committee of enthusiastic staff was formed to make use of the money. Interestingly, most of its members came not from the arts, as you might expect, but from medicine and dentistry, including the Professor of Psychiatry, Ivor Batchelor, seen on the right here, the Professor of Pathology, A.C. Lendrum, this is a portrait of him by Roselle Morocco, and the Professor of Dental Surgery, N.B.B. Simons. The Nichol bequest of the 1950s had covered a wide range, including Scottish, English and some continental pictures, but the new committee decided to concentrate on Scottish art. Their amazingly ambitious intention being to try and acquire at least one work by every major Scottish painter of the past 200 years. The University Court agreed to provide an extra £500 a year to help pursue this policy, which they tackled with quite remarkable success over the next 15 years. Now, unfortunately, the first painting they purchased in 1961, I can't actually show you currently for copyright reasons. It's Joan Erdley's painting Snow 2, one of the many landscape scenes she painted here at Catterline. You can see it on the Art UK website if you're interested. It was bought from an exhibition of her latest work in Edinburgh, so was hot off the easel at the time it was purchased. Meanwhile, James Lamb gave an additional £200 to allow the college to commission a work. They decided to employ Dundee's most celebrated landscape painter, James Mackintosh Patrick, to create this glorious sun-drenched view of Balgai Loch in Angus, which was part of the family estate of the Baxters who had founded University College. Interestingly, these were the only two contemporary paintings that the committee purchased. In contrast to, say, the University of Stirling, which from its founding in 1967 specifically pursued a policy of acquiring modern and contemporary art, Dundee was obviously trying to stress its history and tradition as a 19th century institution, and thus shifted its focus more onto art history. This was clearly signalled in 1964, when the committee attempted to purchase a work by Alan Ramsey, the famous Enlightenment-era portrait painter. This was the painting they bought from Sotheby's, which was considered to be, quote, a genuine Ramsey of the early 1740s. Unfortunately, later authorities disagreed, and in the 1970s it was reattributed, first to the Bath portraitist William Hoare, and then to the London painter Thomas Hudson, which is still the attribution we use today. The subject is quite probably Diana Coote, Countess of Mountrath, whom Hudson painted a larger portrait of in 1746. Unfortunately, we still don't have a Ramsey in our collection to this day. The committee were more successful with their second purchase of 1964, the gorgeous Roses and Still Life by the Scottish colourist S.J. Peploe, bought from a dealer in Glasgow for just £275. Scottish art was still massively undervalued at this time, and the colourists had yet to achieve the extraordinary levels of popularity they enjoy today. The committee would go on to buy a second Peploe in 1967, this time one of his pre-colourist works, a portrait of his childhood nanny, Mary Sanderson, bought for £265. Peploe described her as a Highland woman, Calvinist, holy terror, with heart of gold, but a bad sitter. The head was painted in 34.5 minutes, probably a record. Two other colourist purchases followed. G.L. Hunter's Roses, Melon and Japanese Print for £425 in 1968, and Francis Cadell's wonderfully elegant Cecilia No. 2 for £700 in 1970. Even that amount was pushing the boat out a bit. The committee rarely paid more than £500 for any of their purchases, the principal exception being this impressive full-length portrait by Sir Henry Raeburn, undoubtedly regarded at that time as Scotland's greatest ever painter. A generous legacy from the estate of Miss Agnes Lawrence enabled this to be purchased in 1964 for £2,625. The subject is James Duff, 4th Earl of Fife and 1st Baron Fife. A Knight of the Sword of Sweden, he was also a Major General of the Spanish forces in the Peninsular Wars. He was later MP for Banffshire and Rector of Marischal College in Aberdeen. In 1965, the committee purchased another significant portrait, this 1779 painting by David Allen, one of the most important Scottish painters of the late 18th century. Don't let the long hair and pink ribbon fool you. This may look like a young girl, but it's actually James Abercrombie, the future Baron Dunfermline, shown here at the age of 3. Allen uses symbolic imagery, such as the dove and the dog, to show the child's eminent suitability for his future role as Lord and Master of his estate. Abercrombie went on to be a notable judge and Speaker of the House of Commons. That same year, 1965, the committee also purchased this striking genre painting, the Dowie Denzo Yarrow, by Sir Joseph Noel Peyton, often described as a Scottish Pre-Raphaelite. Peyton had actually declined an invitation to join the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood from John Everett Millais, who had studied with him at the Royal Academy. But the theories of the Pre-Raphaelites continued to influence his work, which was often loaded with spiritual and allegorical significance. This is the last in a series of 6 paintings based on a popular Borders ballad, in which the heroine rejects 9 noblemen in favour of an ordinary ploughboy. The 9 men murder the young lad, and on finding his body, she lies down and dies beside him. Nice cheery story. Engravings of all 6 paintings in the series were published alongside the text of the ballad by the Royal Association for the Promotion of Fine Arts in Scotland. In 1966, the committee purchased another outstanding work, this glorious seascape by William MacTaggart called Lobster Fisher's Macrohanish Bay. MacTaggart had been a particular favourite of the wealthy Dundee art collectors of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, several of whom were personal friends of the artist. This particular painting originally belonged to the Dundee solicitor W.B. Dickey, whose family had loaned it to Queen's College before eventually agreeing to sell it. In 1967, Queen's College became the newly independent University of Dundee, and the committee's most notable purchase that year was another important 20th century work, Boy with a Basket, by Robert Cahoon. 1967 is also well known for the landmark decriminalisation of homosexuality in England, though sadly not in Scotland. Cahoon did not live long enough to see that, unfortunately, dying in the arms of his partner, Robert McBride, 5 years before. The two Roberts, as they were known, had arrived in London from Glasgow in the 1940s and were soon at the centre of queer culture in the city, associating with other gay artists such as Francis Bacon and Keith Vaughan. Cahoon's work doesn't obviously explore sexual themes in the same way as theirs does, but this young man with a shopping basket, a traditionally feminine object, provides an intriguing hint at queer domesticity. As the university's art collection became increasingly recognised, various important donations were made to add to the committee's purchases. Shortly before Dundee gained its university status, the principal of St Andrews, Thomas Malcolm Knox, gifted several works as a symbol of his personal commitment to Dundee's independence, most notably this beautiful depiction of the Loon Valley by the Glasgow School painter James Whitelaw Hamilton. In 1968, 2 beautiful busts by the celebrated sculptor Sir John Steele were gifted by his granddaughter, along with miniature portraits of Steele by 2 of his contemporaries, Robert Scott Lauder and David Scott. And in 1970, the daughter of watercolourist James Douglas presented his 1888 painting Dundee from the Harbour, generally agreed to be his masterpiece. It shows a time when Dundee was a major port for both international and coastal trade. On the horizon, we see many once familiar landmarks: the Law before the War Memorial was built, the William Adam Townhouse, the Royal Arch, and on the left, one thing that hasn't changed, the old steeple. In the 1970s, financial pressures reduced the committee's activities, and only a few works were purchased, perhaps most notably 2 important paintings by the Glasgow Boys. This is Canal by William York MacGregor, often hailed as the father of the Glasgow Boys. and the altogether brighter Spanish Sunday Going to the Bullfight by Arthur Melville, which really captures the hazy heat of the Spanish landscape. Although known as a Glasgow boy, Melville was actually born in Guthrie in Angus. In 1975, the money finally ran out, and Robert Gemmell Hutchinson's Playing on the Rocks Carnoustie was the last purchase for several years. But of course, the university's art and design collection has expanded massively since then, and now comprises over 8,000 works. Sadly, James Lamb did not live to see the many outstanding paintings acquired following his initial gift in 1960. He died in 1962. The new Tower building had opened the year before, and it was decided to name the exhibition gallery that had been created on the first floor in his honour. The Lamb Gallery is still the university's main exhibition space to this day, showcasing many of our art treasures in an ongoing series of free public exhibitions. Well, that's all I have time for just now. I hope you found that interesting, and join me for another film coming soon. Bye for now.